Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 21 of season 3 of Babylon 5 Shadow Dancing. Z-7 days, folks. Delenn is pushing hard for support in the council chamber with Lanier in support, needing as many ships as they can get for what is likely to be the biggest engagement of the Shadow Wars so far. The Leaguers are frustratingly reluctant as they can't be told what the mission is for fear of leaks, worried about their homeworlds, but Delenn reminds them that she and the others have followed through on every promise they've made, including providing them with telepaths. Now it's time to repay those favours to try and draw a line in the sand. Not without risk, no, but it needs to be done. She stresses the need for a speedy decision. Notice that she is wearing her Ranger 1 robes now. Sheridan speaks to Ivanova and Marcus, noting that the Shadows have been driving refugees towards Sector 83 for 2 months. The number of refugee ships arriving has been dropping off, and Sheridan anticipates a strike very soon as it will now have maximum effect. However, to be able to counter an attack without tipping their hand, they need a scout to call in the fleet when the Shadows come calling, and Marcus and Ivanova will be given the White Star to do just that. Their orders are to maintain radio silence, then alert the fleet and get out once the Shadows arrive. It's not quite a suicide mission, but Sheridan only gives them a 50-50 chance of making it back. Joy. Delenn arrives back into an almost deserted council chamber and sees the Drazi who was so questioning when the chamber was full. He notes that the others have gone back to their governments, but he is authorized to speak for them, and she will have the ships she has asked for. He just hopes she's right. So too does she from the look on her face. Ivanova and Marcus take off with an Egyptian blessing from Sheridan. Garibaldi quizzes Zack as to whether he's had any reports of Franklin, still wondering if he could have done anything to remove the need for him to go on walkabout. The scene shifts to Franklin sitting on the floor and down below as a politically correct family group from Earth approach. He entertains their daughter when she throws a ball his way, and they exchange wordless hellos and goodbyes whilst her parents make all the usual assumptions about denizens of down below. The White Star sits nestled in a planetary shadow as Ivanova comes to rest and put Marcus back on watch duty. She notes that he's very good in Minbari as he orders a system check, and he says it's a required part of basic Ranger training because learning to speak and think like a Minbari is good preparation. He then expresses his admiration for her beauty in Minbari. Ultimately, he leaves her to wrestle with the joy that is a Minbari bed. On the station, Sheridan is arming himself as Delenn comes in and gives him the fleet composition news. It's not bad, but it could be better, and Delenn believes keeping their allies will be very hard as the war progresses. They are heading to a Minbari warcruiser as their command ship to join the fleet, and Delenn tells John they will sleep together when they've done what they need to do, but not in the way he's thinking of. She will watch him sleep in order to observe his real face with no masks for a night, then 2 more if she approves of what she sees. After that, remains to be seen. Franklin drops down into a dark corridor and down below and hears sounds of a confrontation. It's 2 thugs on one, but unfortunately they do not take kindly to his peacemaking efforts, and one pulls a knife, stabbing him in the chest. The victim declines to help as his hands were dirty too, leaving Franklin bleeding badly with no means of calling in help. He starts to crawl. In Sector 83, Ivanova has managed to tessellate herself a bed of sorts from various cushions, but as soon as she becomes horizontal, she's called back to the bridge. It's not go time, but Marcus has detected a single vessel similar to a shadow ship but much smaller, their opposite number. They've gone unseen, but they needed to move position to stay hidden behind their moon. Now they can't fire the engines, and they're coming out of eclipse. As soon as they do, they're spotted and forced to chase down their opposing number before it can get a warning off or evade their jamming range. Sheridan, Delenn and Lanier are in hyperspace on their command ship, and Sheridan and Delenn enter a chamber like the Grey Council's, which Delenn calls a tactical command centre, from where they will be able to monitor the battle, although Sheridan's not sure how. Back on the station, Franklin's cries grow weaker as his blood loss continues. Yet suddenly someone else is there, but it's him. Achievement unlocked. He's met himself, walkabout complete. That being said, his other self isn't very complimentary about the state he's in, accusing him of always having to be the hero and not using his head. He says if he wants to talk, they'd better crack on, because he doesn't have much time. Ivanova's mystery ship opens up on the White Star but does no damage. The White Star returns the favour and blows two of its spines off, resulting in it ramming the White Star out of desperation. Jump engines offline, they try to regain their balance when more shadow ships arrive. An awful lot of ships, in fact. Despite the risk of detection, they trigger their alert signal with their engines offline. Their signal is received by the fleet, but the Shadow fleet is only 20 minutes away from them, 3 hours from its primary target in the system. Meanwhile, Franklin is berating himself for walking away from everything whenever the going gets tough. Family, the war, work, now life. Ivanova's engines are nearly back online, but a mainline Shadow vessel has shifted onto an intercept course. As they prepare to fight, Marcus reads an energy spike and the attack fleet jumps in. A holographic display envelops Delenn and Sheridan, giving him a tactical view of what's going on. He orders telepaths to start jamming capital ships, while sending fighters ahead to try and clear the buffer zone the Shadows have put in place to try and prevent the jamming. Medium ships like Drazi Sunhawks are ordered to protect their big guns, and battle is joined as the music picks up the tempo. Franklin says he wants to do it all over again, so his other self demands he take responsibility and get up off the floor and fight as he begins to pull himself up rungs on the wall. Ivanova is finally back in the fight, and it's a hell of a fight. Definitely boom today. Not much talking, the CGI action and the music are taking the strain and doing incredibly well with it. Some quite painful moments as Minbari war cruisers are carved up, but also some great moments where the races have each other's backs. Interspersed with this is Franklin dragging himself back towards the market we first saw him in this episode. The attack fleet finally manages to drive the Shadows off, but as we're then told and as we can see as Delenn and Sheridan hold one another, the cost was high. 2 allied ships lost for every Shadow ship destroyed. And back on the station, as the injured are brought in, Garibaldi asks an important question. As big and costly a victory as this was, how will the Shadows respond? The thought has occurred to Sheridan too. Garibaldi waits for Franklin to wake up, which he does, but not before he costs Garibaldi 30 more credits. Franklin says he found what he needed, if not what he wanted. Garibaldi is happy he's okay, and he knows he needed to do it, but hopes he won't be repeating it anytime soon. Franklin watches as Medlab fills up with wounded. In hyperspace, a mainline Shadow ship releases a much smaller shuttlecraft that shoots away from it. On the station, Sheridan continues to ponder Garibaldi's question with Delenn and Ivanova, with Ivanova the pessimist noting that the station is basically a sitting duck, even with Dral there to back them up. Sheridan asks if she thinks they've been deliberately ignored for some reason. Then he rubs his head and remembers the dream Kosh sent him when he was injured in All Alone in the Night. Piecing it all together, Ivanova's latent telepath revelation, working with Bester off the back of John being in a Psycho uniform at one point. Finally, they deduce that John being termed the Hand when he has two suggests that the other hand is the one looking for him, his opposite and equal. John just isn't sure, but he knows something is coming, probably sooner rather than later, and the shuttle continues on in hyperspace as if to prove the point. Franklin is advising his staff from a wheelchair as Sheridan joins him in Medlab. He's offered his old job back and he accepts, vowing to do it better rather than trying to do more, which is what the stims let him do. He says he ran away rather than get fired, always obsessing about what he wasn't rather than focusing on what he was. That's going to change. He's going to appreciate the moments. As Sheridan sleeps with Delenn watching on, someone comes on board and we see their progress from their point of view. Zack calls through to Ivanova to tell her someone's arrived and it's major and concerns the captain. And it is. And it does. A woman appears in the doorway to John's quarters as Delenn examines the snow globe and announces herself as Anna Sheridan, John's wife. The snow globe falls. Melissa Gilbert, who plays Anna, was actually Boxleitner's wife for a while, so this isn't a huge stretch. But what is the fact that up to this point, she's been presumed dead, because she was on Morden's ship, the Icarus. Despite having been interrogated by Sheridan, Morden never revealed whether she also survived, but here we have her brought in by the Shadows for some reasons unknown, at the same time as Delenn is trying to further cement her relationship with John. Shocking and awkward, rather like the fact that Melissa Gilbert is advertised as being in the episode in the opening credits, which must have been a pain for JMS, although she's only credited as Anna. So on this cliffhanger of a return, we conclude the episode. It's been really interesting watching it again, because I knew what was coming, so the impact has been rather different this time. Back in the day, I loved the sheer scale and audacity of attempting a space battle that big at that point in time, and putting Ivanova and Marcus in the middle of it is very clever, because as with Severed Dreams, it means key characters are at risk and getting knocked about. This time round though, perhaps because I've recently been completing The Expanse, I was noting the little things like the pain on Sheridan and Glenn's faces as fragments of ships virtually tumble behind them. They know the lives that have just been lost is a burden they now carry together. There's no grandstanding about the victory they've just achieved. That's not to say the effects combined with the score aren't terrific, they are. And again, we see the sheer variety of ships in the series and their different strengths, but most importantly, we see them fighting together, even though Jatok is committed once again, the Narn ship. As Ivanova notes, it's the first time it's ever been done. So absolutely loads of potential for a ship spotter, and the Shadow Scout is brand new in this episode and suitably spidery, but the real significance here is that the younger races successfully combined to drive the Shadows off. Also the debut for the White Star Fleet, which we'd only just met of course. So it's no wonder the Shadows do pull back to consider their next step, although I suspect given the attrition rate they might have run out, but at great cost to their ability to function in the future. Franklin finally completes his walkabout, owing to some stabbiness by a rather unhinged resident of Down Below, and equally due to the complete lack of help given to him by the ungrateful sod he tried to help. No good deed goes unpunished indeed. And then it turns out that the other version of him he finds is far from being his own greatest fan, and proceeds to assassinate his character. But in doing so provides the boot he needed to, well, reboot his life. Tortured metaphor, sorry, but I think sometimes if you can come back from a low, you do gain a certain clarity. And even before he can walk again, Franklin has started to take control of his life, rather than his life controlling him. And happily Garibaldi can dodge the bullet on any guilt he would otherwise have felt for losing his friend. So it's a painful lesson learned, sure, but a lesson learned all the same. The show Delenn progresses more, just made that up, as Delenn decides to see whether Sheridan's face fits. Typically lovely interplay between the two of them, which is of course called into question by the last minute arrival of his wife into the equation. I did find the dream explanation scene that hinted at someone looking for him a little forced. That dream was planted a long time ago by Kosh, but for it to suddenly be called on again seems a little convenient, although I do see the context to a degree. Kosh may have anticipated that the Shadows would not go full frontal on the station, but instead use their penchant for agents to get the job done where humans are involved. If you think back to War Without End, we know we're close to the point where in one timeline the Shadows did take the station out, so that's got to be on their minds. It's also clever that the Shadows use Anna rather than Morden, because he'd probably have been flagged as soon as he set foot on the station. The Marcus Ivanova dynamic is also explored a little more this episode, but Marcus still won't tackle it head on, bless him. She seems to be more accepting of him now as compared with the rather frosty start they had, when she just wasn't sure how to categorise him. It was a rather curious start to the episode with them both basically being thrown into the lion's den. Not quite a suicide mission, but not exactly giving the warm fuzzies about the outcome either. Their White Star is clearly pretty tough now, considering a flat-out kamikaze attack didn't inflict serious hull damage. If only they could do something about the beds, they'd be laughing. I find myself thinking that I want to like this episode more for some reason, which is strange because there's nothing wrong with it. The scene where the space battle is interspersed with Franklin lurching towards the market works really well because they don't need words, they just carry themselves along with the score and the action. I also really like the moment early on where Delenn arrives into the deserted council chamber and you're just not sure what that means for what comes next. It's a nice piece of misdirection. And it sets the tone because there's that question of what the consequences of this battle could lead to, left hanging in the air. That remains unresolved because there will have been a lot of losses which may deter the League from committing in the future. Perhaps what's interesting here is that we've now had the sort of big climactic battle that could have closed out the season, but we're left with the return of Anna Sheridan and a countdown with a couple of days to run. So what this episode does do very effectively is to say, here you go, well done, the good guys won at a price, but the Shadows are in no way done, and now they've sent you a visitor. So where do we go from here? How do we close things out? Find out next week.